So this is a fresh conversation. I'm calling it, wow, I think it was called, so I was talking to somebody and he was talking about being stuck in a cycle. And I looked at him straight in the eye and I was like, why use cycle and not use pattern? And I didn't know what I was talking about. So I'm going to try to re-explain it how I explained it to him, and I'm going to see how that kind of like sounds. And also, the goal is to get feedback. Even if somebody vibes with the conversation, it doesn't really mean that they're actually like understanding what's going on. So, that felt good. What's the difference between a pattern and a cycle? In my mental model, a cycle is a closed loop, right? It's just repeating itself. Whilst a pattern is repetitive behavior. So I looked at a person, I was like, if you were to explain a cycle to yourself, you would find yourself having to break it in order for you to kind of like get out of it. And so listen to the words that I'm using. Uh, Cycle, break, get out. Cycle, break, get out. Whilst if we're thinking in a form of pattern, cycle, break, get out. All of them kind of like show stuck, all right? Whilst pattern, if we use pattern, then ultimately you all you have to do, pattern is repetitive behavior, right? Behavior. And if you want to get out of a pattern, you just stop what you're doing or add something else to change the pattern. So pattern goes more towards maybe habit, right? If you're thinking of a pattern, you're thinking more of the habit that you're having. But the reality is, if you're thinking of a cycle, you're thinking about like something kind of claustrophobic. Claustrophobic. So I sat with him and I was like talking to him and I was telling him, uh, in a cycle, you're stuck. In a pattern, you're not. You're kind of like, it becomes so habitual and easy to kind of do it that it happens on its own. Then it's very much your intention that kind of like adds something to it or removes something from it. You can form a pattern in anything and you can get stuck in a cycle anywhere. But the idea is the mental understanding of this versus this. And so I try to separate it specifically in the whole words that I just used right now. In order to get out of a pattern, all you have to do is stop doing what you're doing. In order to get out of a cycle, you have to be strong enough to not allow what's happening to affect you anymore. And thus, you'll be able to kind of like fight something or get over something. I don't know, it's the words used to describe a cycle and the words used to get out of one are very harsh and require a lot of effort, which if we had before, we won't be stuck in that cycle. Whilst when it comes to pattern, all we have to do, and it's funny because that's mainly every single advice that's ever given. That's mainly every single advice that's ever given by any religion. It's always like, take a step back. They say pray, but ultimately, what do you do when you pray? You're just allowing yourself kind of like to vibe, right? You're allowing yourself to like observe what's going on. You're allowing yourself to notice what's happening around you, which is ultimately the best way to break a pattern. Just see what you're doing. Actively look at what you're habitually repeating. And from there you're kind of like you're already initiated a winning formula. And so that's the thought process that I was trying to like transfer to him. If I were to elaborate on it differently, I actually pointed at how the day would work. And if you take something that kind of like repeats itself every day, because it's all about the observation, you're not stuck. You're just doing things over and over again. The pattern, it's easier for the pattern to repeat itself. And it's harder for you, it becomes harder for you to kind of like just put in any effort because everything that's already happening is kind of like effortless. So it gets harder for you to put in any effort in order for you to kind of like do something different. And you think of a pattern from terms of energy, because your entire existence purpose is to adapt and kind of like handle everything around it on its own. So the more you think, the more you do something, the easier it becomes for you to do. So it doesn't get easier, you get better. Has anyone actually heard that before? It doesn't get easier, you get better, which literally means as you actually proceed in the task at hand, regardless of what it is, you get better at doing it, period. If the task is just watching TV, you get better at watching TV. We all have watched TV where we don't need to focus and we're doing many things before. In fact, at some point, actively having like TVs around or some sounds around or music around helps us focus because they become like something, I don't know, man. It's just like it's a pattern that becomes within our surroundings anytime I know for me, I think it's people call it's ADHD. You kind of like you have to give something to your brain in order for it to be processing. Because if you're just processing what you want to process, it's going to do everything at once and it's going to connect it to everything that's potential there. But if you actually put something in the background that's like moving, active, and you kind of like can go back and forth, then it helps you kind of like do a lot more work. And so effective patterns versus ineffective patterns as well. We never know how we react to the environments around us because everything that is us right now has been built from the day that we started opening our eyes, listening, feeling, tasting, all that stuff. And ultimately, we have to work with what we have as best as we could. And this doesn't come by force at all. You can't brute force your way outside of a cycle. If you do that, you're going to be basically carrying a lot of weight with you, or the stress behind it is going to be intense. But you can literally just adjust bits and pieces of your daily pattern, and each one of them would actually affect more and more and more things. Because ultimately, if you take 5 minutes from something and include it in your day, then you're chopping 5 minutes from something else. So ultimately, it's no longer the same pattern. It's just still on the bigger scale. Give this pattern on the bigger scale is giving you the similar effect. But 3 months down the line, if you just take 5 minutes of three things and you add them to your day, 1 year down the line, the whole pattern has a completely different vibe to it. Even though it's still the same day repeating itself in like 90% the same way. But that extra 5% is changing your mind. That extra 5, 10 minutes of the other things in your head are affecting your mind. You're looking at life differently. It can't be helped. It's an impactful thing. You can't unlearn something you're learning it. And especially if you're every single day consistently including it in your life, which means at the end of like 3 months to a year, every single day is looking different than the day before. And eventually, man, the whole days are going to look completely different, which means you're a completely different person looking at them. Your reality is altered. Whilst in a cycle, you just kind of go out and you have to look for a new cycle. And I also basically discussed the cycle with him in a different way, where I pointed that if you were to include, you cannot escape a cycle without either joining another or building another. Because you're either part of a cycle that supports a bigger one, or you are a cycle that supports smaller ones. And then when I looked at it that way, I started explaining to him that that's basically what your
Talk
pattern will
about
actively like
trigger words like
engage with.
that, smart, stupid, and how those can work
Because
against your best
instead of
intentions.
looking at the whole
Yes.
cycle,
When
look at the pattern.
call someone
that contributes
smart.
to a bigger
You
cycle.
put them in a box, or
And then
really
as you
you're kind
change
of
your
putting them
pattern, you
on a
kind of like move in
pedestal,
between
and their
cycles. So
life
it's no longer a
becomes
force for
organized
you to like
around
engage with.
deserving the
It's more like,
pedestal,
oh, it
staying on
seems
the
like that way
pedestal.
is a much
And you
better
can
way
only
for me
do
to go.
that
So you
by
alternate with your patterns,
narrowing
and
your
slow and steady, they
life
basically
to
like
include only things you're sure
change
you're
the
good at,
cycle
only
that you're
things
in.
you're sure you can
And
succeed
I
at.
don't know, man, because in my head, it
When we
doesn't seem
tell
like a
someone, you
physical
did that so
thing.
quickly, I'm so
But like,
impressed,
instead of brute
they
forcing
hear,
yourself out of
if I
something, why
didn't
not
do it
just
quickly,
shift
you
it to
wouldn't be
something else until
impressed.
you find something
And
that's
a lot
better?
of
We all
things
want to get
take
stuck in
a long
something.
time.
We all want to be living the life that we
Or
want to live.
you got
And for us, it
you got
doesn't
an
look like
A
a
without
cycle, but for other
working,
people, it
then
does.
they think,
Some people
oh,
just want to like
if
watch
I
TV every day. Some
work,
people want to work every day.
you're not going to think
To them,
I'm
that's not a
smart
cycle.
at math,
For
say.
other people, it
And so
is.
that you're
And
just
ultimately,
very
imposing
subtly
our
conveying these
ideas
ideas that
is
smart
us
people don't
basically
make
standing in our
mistakes,
own way.
smart people don't have to
When
work
alternatively, if
hard.
we actually
The most
allow the
important
things that
thing in
we
the
like to
world
be a
is
part
to
of our day,
be
then
smart and look
ultimately
smart at all
the
times. And
favorite
then
thing that we want to do,
people
which
start
is a cycle to
narrowing
everyone
their
else, would
world
not
so
look
they
like a
can
cycle to
succeed
us.
within that fixed mindset.
So one
And
thing
it's all
at
about the
Google that we're obsessed
patterns.
with is proving
What do
things
you
through
think?
data. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the
It was a good
compelling arguments
conversation.
your book made was around the
Thank
research you
you.
did with children in a school